Hello, I'm John. We want to tell you about an interesting and little-known subject that falls on one of the darker sides of American history. After the Civil War, the U.S. government enacted on a series of policies aimed with the end goal of assimilating Native Americans into American society. Cultural assimilation is the process of converting one's culture into another and absorbing that group into mainstream society. Following the countless conflicts and broken treaties with the marginalized Native population, the government decided to simply convert the Native American culture with Christian values. They would achieve this by taking Native American youth and forcing them into boarding schools with the hope that, at their young age, they could become easily convertible.
In 1879, the first government boarding school was founded. Created by U.S. Army officer Captain Richard Pratt, the Native American boarding school was developed with an end goal of eradicating all beliefs, morals, and traditions practiced by these Native people. Survivors of these boarding schools shared a few of their memories. They remember being forced into government vehicles as their parents watched helplessly. Although most were, not all Native children were taken by force. Because most of the public schools were extremely racist, the boarding schools were the only education route available for most. Upon arriving at these schools, the Native children were given haircuts, uniforms, and American names. They were prohibited from speaking their native language, and if caught, they would face extreme consequences. The punishments faced by the students at these schools were severe, as they ranged from beatings to being locked in guardhouses for days with only bread and water. They were not allowed to be Indian in any way, as they were taught the fundamental reading, writing, and language-based knowledge of the English people. They were also taught an extremely white-biased point of view of American history. Edith Young, a survivor of the boarding school process, reflected on a time in class when she was taught that Christopher Columbus discovered America. When she questioned this, stating that Indians were in America first, she was slapped across the face in front of the whole class. She recalled that moment as one she will never forget. In addition to biased views of history, on Memorial Day, the students were made to decorate the graves of the soldiers who killed their fathers. They were taught European ways of farming and were given religious training in Christianity. After the school, students were expected to return to their reservations and induce European assimilation there. Others were funneled into jobs in white culture, giving up all ways of their previous life. As a result of these boarding schools, many natives suffer from PTSD and have no idea how to function as a family. Today, few boarding schools remain, as a result of the shift in policy, lack of government funding, and the growth of independent education systems on reservations.
The Dawes Act, adopted on February 8, 1887, was one of the most important pieces of legislation in terms of Indian affairs in United States history. This act came at a time of aggressive westward expansion in which pressures on Indian lands brought new conflict between American settlers and natives. Essentially, it authorized the president to issue surveys of tribal lands and divide them into small allotments for individual families. Only those who accepted the distributed allotments of land were qualified to become U.S. citizens. This policy stemmed from the varying ideals of property between American Indians and white settlers. Indian culture valued the idea of a sharing community and did not value individual property. However, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, T. Hartley Crawford, expressed a popular opinion when he wrote, "Common property and civilization cannot coexist." As a result, the government adopted the Dawes Act in order to destroy this aspect of their culture, weaken their tribal organizations, and ultimately assimilate them into mainstream American society. This solution to the so-called Indian problem was even hailed by the heavily involved reform groups as the Indian Emancipation Act. However, this legislative measure had a lot of severely negative effects on American Indian society, including the loss of 90 million acres of tribal lands to settlers and railroad companies. But most importantly, countless families and communities became divided, and many tribes experienced a substantial loss of culture through this aggressive assimilation attempt. Fortunately, public opinion towards the treatment of Native Americans shifted in the 1920s and 30s. On June 18, 1934, the administration of President Franklin D. Roosevelt created the Indian Reorganization Act. This new legislative measure re-enabled Native Americans to form their own governments, and it ended the land allotments created by the Dawes Act. However, the effects of the Dawes Act would continue on and can even be seen today. For example, tribes have still not regained their lost lands, and many remain scarred from loss of culture and tradition.
After the Civil War ended, the United States government began to move Native Americans away from their tribal lands and onto reservations. Through these actions, Native Americans had their right to self-determination systematically taken away from them. Self-determination refers to the process by which a person controls their own life. The United States government, through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, has slaughtered natives, stolen their land, and attempted to destroy their culture. However, the Native Americans did not go without a fight. In 1890, some tribes initiated a movement to preserve their culture known as the ghost dances. These religious dances would last for weeks and were believed to eventually give the natives their land back. More recently, in the 1970s, Native Americans fought for tribal sovereignty and self-determination, staging sit-ins to get the United States government's attention. Their pleas were answered in the form of grants given to the tribes. These grants provided public services for the tribesmen in order to maintain some small amount of sovereignty. Since this, there has been an even greater push for tribal sovereignty, and even some more acts passed by the federal government. This includes acts that improve a tribe's ability to create a small business, police themselves, and run as a sovereign body in general. The United States government took everything from these tribes. However, as time has passed, congressional support for tribal sovereignty has increased due to the self-determination movement, and hopefully this will continue.
It is common knowledge that today, American Indians living on U.S. reservations face severe poverty and hardship. While some of the reasons for this include the modern-day labor market and capital inequities, many of the reasons can be traced back to the era of assimilation. The Indian Removal Act and the Dawes Act both triggered irreversible effects to the Indian population that can still be seen today. The lands in which they were relocated to were typically those of poor settlement, unfit for productive agriculture. Combined with the splitting up of lands due to the Dawes Act, the Indians were tossed into a new environment that they were not accustomed to. As American Indians' worlds were turned upside down, America as a nation was being transformed by the Industrial Revolution, where urbanization, manufacturing, and the complexity of economics were all increased. Suddenly, in order to succeed in life, one was expected to have a marketable skill that enabled them to serve others in some way, thus obtaining capital. With little skills at hand due to their sudden change in lifestyle, American Indians had little to offer in the new society and were sucked into financial hardship that was passed down through generations. Due to conditions on reservations, children often remained in poverty throughout their whole lives, continuing the cycle of poverty. Today, American Indians experience poverty rate of 28% as a whole and 38% to 63% on reservations. Life expectancy, due to the increased risk for disease and inhumane living conditions, is significantly lowered than the rest of America. For example, Native Americans are 177% more likely to die from diabetes, 500% more likely to die of tuberculosis, and 82% more likely to commit suicide. The unemployment rate is as high as 80% on some reservations due to the lack of jobs and economic opportunity. While contemporary factors that fuel the continuing poverty are at large, the historical disadvantages due to government policy still leave their mark on reservations today. Assimilation of American Indians was proved to be both unsuccessful for the government and harmful for the future of Native Americans. In the end, the only positive effect was the rise of the self-determination movement. But that alone does not justify this shameful episode in America's past.